The secondary communications console in the primary hub displayed a steady, unblinking green light indicating 100% signal integrity. I adjusted my headset twice, pressing the haptic receivers deeper into my auditory pits, but the expected background static of the sector's radio traffic was absent. In its place sat a void so heavy it felt as though my ears had been sealed with cooling wax. It was the first time in my career as a cargo supervisor that I had truly heard the silence of the void. Then the percussion began. It wasn't a mechanical groan or the hum of a failing pump, but a sharp, rhythmic violence that resonated through the soles of my talons. Clang, 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 clang. Somewhere deep in the titanium spine of Mining Station 4G, a piece of structural metal was being subjected to the concentrated fury of a rhythmic assault. "The human has finally snapped," whispered First Mate Vol. His dorsal fin flattened against his neck in a gesture of absolute terror as the air in the command hub began to smell of ozone and recycled carbon dioxide. "She's performing the percussive rage right. She is destroying the life support conduit." I watched the seismic sensors spike on my secondary display. Each blow registered as a localized structural shock, a violent punctuation mark in a story of impending suffocation. The hull wasn't just vibrating. It was singing a jagged, discordant song. My scales dimmed to a fearful charcoal as I realized the sound was coming from the primary coolant bypass, the very heart of our oxygen circulation system. 6 cycles earlier, the air on the station had been crisp, filtered to the exact specifications of a Hadrothi rainforest. I was conducting a routine inspection of the lower maintenance tier when I first encountered Ines. She was a small, grimy creature, half swallowed by an access panel near the Sector 4 heat exchangers. In her right hand, she gripped an adjustable wrench, a heavy slab of crude, oil-stained steel that seemed like a primitive insult to our delicate latticework of glass fiber pipes. I remember stopping to watch her. She wasn't actually working. Instead, she had her right ear pressed directly against the cold, sweating metal of the main structural bulkhead. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. She stayed like that for nearly a minute, ignoring the hiss of escaping steam and the frantic, rhythmic clicking of my reporting tablet. "The flow rate is dropping in this sector, Plumber," I had barked, my mandibles snapping in annoyance. "Consult the digital diagnostic data, not the architecture." Ines had pulled back slowly, wiping a smear of black grease across her forehead with the back of a calloused hand. She patted the bulkhead with a familiarity that bordered on the grotesque, her expression one of weary condescension. "The data tells me the pump is spinning, Supervisor. The wall tells me the bearings in Sector 7 are about to turn into shrapnel." She tightened the adjustment screw on her wrench with a sharp flick of her thumb, the metal clicking into place. "The hull is just a big drum. You just have to know how to beat it to get the truth out." I had dismissed her words as the eccentricities of a species that had evolved on a high-gravity Deathworld. Humans were known for their reliance on tactile feedback, a byproduct of their clumsy, 5-fingered biology. I did not record the incident in the log. It was a mundane moment of interspecies friction, or so I believed at the time. The blackout did not arrive with the screaming of sirens. It was a silent theft. First, the long-range communications array went dark, the signal bars on our screens remaining full even as the messages failed to send. Then the station-wide paging system sputtered and died. Within 3 minutes, every internal sensor began to report a total communications blackout, even as the status lights remained a mocking, persistent green. We were blind and mute in the center of a magnetic solar storm that had turned our sophisticated antennas into useless needles. In the cargo bay, the atmosphere curdled. Fear among my people is a quiet, visual thing, a slow dimming of the bioluminescent scales on our chests. I found myself standing near the transit airlock, watching the human refugees we had taken on from the Vesper colonies. A child, a small boy named Luca, sat on a stack of ration crates clutching a plastic shuttle toy. Its tiny red light flickered once. A stutter in the "no, it wasn't the battery" The toy died as the secondary power grid sputtered, leaving the boy staring at a piece of dark plastic. He didn't cry. He simply looked at the dead toy, then up at the dark, silent vents above us. The heat began to rise almost immediately. Without the coolant circulation pumps, the station's sun-facing side started to bake the interior. The air became thick, tasting of dry copper and the salt of our own sweat. We were trapped in a 40-kiloton metal coffin, waiting for the oxygen scrubbers to fail. That was when the banging started. It originated from the lowest level, a sound so loud it bypassed the auditory pits and rattled the very fluid in our brains. I led a small team of security droids down the maintenance shaft, my scales flickering in a frantic strobe of emergency amber. We found Ines in the primary coolant gallery. The red emergency lighting turned the sweat on her skin the color of old blood. She had discarded her cooling vest, standing in a thin undershirt that was soaked through. She wasn't repairing anything. She was standing in front of the primary coolant pipe, a massive 3-meter-wide pillar of solid alloy that ran the entire length of the station's spine. With both hands wrapped around the handle of her heavy wrench, she was swinging. Clang, 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 clang. "Stop her!" Vol shouted, his voice cracking as the droids hesitated. "She's puncturing the main line. She's trying to kill us all before the air runs out." Ines didn't even look at us. Her face was a mask of intense concentration, her jaw set so tight I could hear her teeth grinding. She swung the wrench with a mechanical precision, hitting the exact same spot on the pipe over and over. Each impact sent a shower of orange sparks into the gloom. The sound was deafening, a physical wall of noise that made the droid's sensors loop in confusion. "Ines!" I screamed, stepping forward into the spray of sparks. "The life support systems are failing. We need silence to recalibrate the emergency comms." She paused for a fraction of a second, her chest heaving, her eyes wild and bright in the strobing red light. She didn't drop the wrench. She gripped it tighter, the metal tool looking like a natural extension of her arm. "Your comms are dead, Idrathi. The storm fried the digital buffers. Nobody is coming because nobody can hear your electronic screaming." She turned back to the pipe and delivered 3 more thunderous blows. The entire gallery seemed to groan in response. "I'm not destroying the pipe, you idiot. I'm using it." I stared at her, my cognitive processors struggling to bridge the gap. She was attacking the very infrastructure of our survival. To a Idrathi, this was the ultimate sacrilege, the destruction of the Great Cord. I moved to signal the droids to stun her, but then I felt it. A tremor. Not from her wrench, but an answering vibration from deep within the floor. It was a low, subsonic pulse that seemed to echo her strikes. It wasn't a random reverberation. It was a shadow of her own rhythm, returning from the far end of the station. Ines wiped the salt from her eyes and looked at me, a fierce, terrifying pride in her gaze. "The hull is a big drum, Supervisor, and I'm currently the loudest thing in this sector." The vibration in the deck plating shifted from a series of rhythmic shocks into a low, thrumming resonance that seemed to harmonize with the station's dying breath. Ines did not stop her assault on the coolant pipe, but her strikes grew measured, her breathing a series of ragged, timed inhalations. The air in the gallery had reached a stagnant, humid 40 degrees, thick with the smell of scorched insulation and the salt of a dozen panicked species. My scales felt brittle, the charcoal pigment darkening as the oxygen levels dipped into the red zone on my flickering wrist display. I realized then that her earlier behavior, the strange, silent communion with the bulkheads, had not been a symptom of a fracturing mind. She had been mapping the acoustic architecture of our home, finding the exact node where the station's titanium spine acted as a natural amplifier. To a Idrathi, the hull was a barrier to be maintained. To her, it was a medium. It was the bones of the thing, and she was speaking through them with the authority of a ghost. "You are wasting your remaining energy, Plumber," Vol rasped, his dorsal fin twitching in the dim red emergency light. The void consumes all sound. No one can hear your tantrums in a vacuum. Ines paused, her shoulders trembling under the weight of the steel tool. She didn't look at the first mate, but at me, her eyes reflecting the strobe of the alarm. Sound doesn't need air when it has steel, supervisor. It's called acoustic conduction, the way a signal travels through a solid faster than a scream travels through a room. I'm not shouting into the void. I'm turning this entire 400-meter station into a ringing bell. The physical cost of this broadcast was etched into the way her body began to fail, her rhythmic strikes slowing as the lack of oxygen clouded her human faculties. Every swing of the heavy wrench required a calculated effort of will, her knuckles white and raw where they gripped the oil-slicked metal handle. She was no longer just a technician. She had become the mechanical heart of the station, her movements synchronized with the groaning structure of our dying home. The air around her shimmered with a haze of metallic dust and rising heat, the cooling fans long since stilled, leaving us in a stagnant, humid tomb that smelled of unwashed bodies and the chemical tang of failing scrubbers. The sound was no longer a noise. It had become a heartbeat. Ines lowered the wrench for a moment and pulled a tattered, greasy rag from her pocket. With a slow, steady hand, she began to wipe a smudge of black lubricant from the tool's adjustable jaw, checking the screw thread with a practiced flick of her thumb. She then